afternoon, everyone. For those that just joined, this is Vanessa Senders from the American Hotel and Lodging Association. I am joined on the phone, jointly moderating this session by Chirag Shah, Vice President for Government Affairs at AHOA. And he and I are very excited to be with all of you today to talk about our upcoming Legislative Action Summit next week that hopefully all of you are registered for and set to come to DC. We're super excited to we have over 400 attendees registered and signed up, which is on par with where we were last year, and I think will be a great showing here in DC, in our nation's capital, with our members of Congress and elected officials on these important issues affecting the industry. So on today's webinar, we wanted to go through a couple of different things, and I might move on to the next slide. As we think about what we want to go over with all of you today, we have broken it out into a couple different areas. One, we want to give everyone some tips for effective congressional outreach. I know a lot of you have been to DC many times and have participated in our Legislative Action Summit either with HLA or AHOA. But some folks are new, and we want to make sure that you have that information at your fingertips before coming to DC next week. We also, I think, by all of you signing up and being on this webinar, probably understand the benefits from attending LAS, but want to talk through that a bit. And most importantly, really talk through the issues that we want to bring up in our congressional meetings, the issues that are impacting the industry, the legislative acts, and go over that information. And I would say this webinar, we want it to be informative and make sure that you all have the opportunity to get your questions answered. So as we're going through the webinar, if you have questions, please type them into the spot on your computer screen, and Chirag or I will answer those questions as quickly as possible. We want to make sure everyone has all the information that they need to have a successful DC trip and time here in the city. And again, just really thank all of you for joining us today. And lastly, before I turn it over to Chirag, this is we have done the Legislative Action Summit multiple years, HLA and AHOA, and I think it is a true partnership and collaboration and really showcases the strength of the industry, bringing together all of our hoteliers in force and really mobilizing on Capitol Hill. So a big thank you to AHOA for, again, joining us and working with us this year, and a big thanks to Chirag and his team. I think we're going to have a great event next week. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chirag.
Thanks, Vanessa, and I would echo those exact same sentiments. Thank you to you and to Catherine and your team for all of your efforts in uniting the industry and bringing everybody together, especially here in Washington, D.C., where we have an opportunity to really hopefully shape our legislative agenda, not just for our industry, but for businesses across the spectrum. And we've had a great opportunity to really drive several issues that I know collectively as an industry we've been working on over the last couple of years. And this year, after the election, after a variety of things, it looks like there is an opportunity for us to really make some movement. And so there's a great value in having so many voices from the lodging industry come and share the stories about great local jobs that are created by our industry and the impacts on the economy that we have. And so looking forward to seeing everybody here in Washington next week. We're moving on to our conversation about 5 tips for effective congressional outreach. And really the most important thing to keep in mind is that this is a business meeting like any other that we've had or that you all have on a daily basis, weekly basis. The difference is the objective. Perhaps instead of trying to get people to stay at your hotels or to drive ADR or anything along those lines. This is trying to make sure that your business has an opportunity to grow, and you as a job creator have an opportunity to expand your workforce and create new jobs in your community. I think our first issue is to ensure that you know that you're the expert, that you are the expert on the issues. Now, that may seem strange because members of Congress would be people that are elected to know these things, and that sometimes comes as a surprise that people don't appreciate the fact that there are thousands of bills that are introduced before Congress every year, and that's just in one session. And so everything from agriculture to judiciary to a variety of other types of committees, there may be a variety of things. Your member of Congress may not be on that relevant committee, or your member of Congress may not have heard about this issue previously. So recall that you're the expert on the issue, and feel free to give a primer on the issue prior to diving in. And the other thing is that you're an expert on your business and how the issue affects it. No one's asking you necessarily to be an expert on law or the legislative history or anything else for that matter, but rather to be an expert specifically in your business and how this particular issue affects it. And so that's the story that you want to share with your member of Congress, because they can appreciate then how it affects people in their district. Next, we'll talk about making a personal connection. And this is extremely important as well, because it gives you an opportunity to really have your message resonate with the member of Congress and his or her staff. Simple things like where it is exactly that you live and your business, especially if it's in the district, they will all of these things because it will give an opportunity for them to understand what exactly the impact is on people they represent. And so there are a variety of other things that you may be able to do, whether it's volunteer things that you do in your personal time, taking an opportunity to research your member of Congress before going in and meeting with him or her. Perhaps you attend at the same university, perhaps they have an interest outside that would really open the door as a gateway. It's just like meeting anybody else new. You look for a commonality, and in this case, that will make your meeting all the more memorable. Number 3 is to be clear, concise, and direct. A lot of these meetings don't last very long. You can expect your meetings to last anywhere between 15 and 20 to 30 minutes. And sometimes when you have 4, 5, 6 people in your meeting, by the time you get done with introductions, it doesn't leave a lot of time for making an impression on the issues you're there to discuss. And so just like being an expert on your business, you need to make sure that you're direct on the message that you're trying to lead, explaining what the problem is and explaining what you believe the best solution is in the talking points that we've prepared and that we'll go over during the conference. Making sure that you don't go into extraneous hypotheticals or really debating somebody, especially if they seem like they're not necessarily going to agree with you, but getting down to the brass tacks of the matter and making sure that you direct that meeting. Because the worst thing that can happen is that you have the meeting, you leave, and you realize there's several other things that were left and you never got a chance to talk about. Certainly you can follow up, but you have a great opportunity before your member of Congress to share your thoughts. So clear, concise, and direct. 4th is to illustrate the impact and emphasize what the impact is for you. Again, as someone who's a professional in the lodging industry, what is the impact of the issue on you, your businesses, your employees, and particularly your community? We're talking about a variety of topics here that really span the entirety of the lodging industry. Everything from tax reform, which is a near universal, it has a near universal impact, to booking scams, which will have an impact specifically on our industry, but also consumers, as well as ADA drive-by lawsuits. There are a variety of things that will impact you and your business and your employees, and to make sure they understand what exactly the harms are or why it is that you're there to speak with them. And then 5 is the most important thing to lead that meeting with is making the ask. Doing all of these things beforehand, becoming relatable and making a personal connection, explaining the issue are all great. And you can leave that meeting having felt great about informing a member of Congress about something. But unless you directly make an ask, they don't have marching orders. Again, at the end of the day, they work for you as voters, and so it's very important that you leave that meeting having asked them to co-sponsor legislation, vote for a piece of legislation, do additional research into something, to make sure you come out of that meeting having requested that office take some degree of action, so then when you follow up, you can ask what they've discovered, if it is research or if they were able to co-sponsor the bill. Vanessa, anything you'd like to add?
Oh, thanks, Sharad. I think you covered it. Sounds great. Okay, I think let's turn from kind of tips for attending or kind of effective communication with your members of Congress and in these meetings to some of the benefits for attending LAS. And obviously, as we said at the outset, we greatly appreciate each one of you taking time today to participate on the webinar, and also, more importantly, taking multiple days out of your busy schedules next week to come to DC. We obviously think it's extremely important, as Chirag and I have both said, for you all to be in front of your members of Congress, because you are the ones that they want to hear from. Your stories, your personal kind of appeal on the issues that matter most is going to help us move the needle on these advocacy issues. But on the flip side, we also want to make sure that we are providing an event and a venue that is really beneficial to you. And obviously, from our perspective, we think that building those individual relationships that you are going to do, and you do by attending LAS and going to your meetings with your members of Congress, that is extremely important, obviously, from an industry perspective, but also hopefully from a personal perspective for you in your business and in your community. And I think this year we are scheduling meetings across the board, and for every state delegation, either HLA, AHOA, or we have some of the state lodging associations participating too, and I think it's going to be a great lineup of meetings and really give you a really good opportunity to build that relationship with your member of Congress. We talked about it, but obviously, from our perspective, the fact that you'll be able to educate these members of Congress on the issues that are important to the industry that we're going to get into in a minute is, I mean, number one reason, and we think benefit for being here in DC. The third point, and this is something that I know HLA and AHOA have spent a lot of time on, and something that we're focused on for the future, is really sharing the positive narrative of the hotel industry, the fact that we're in every congressional district, the fact that we create jobs, the fact that you all are community leaders and business leaders in your community. That story is something that I think isn't always told, and is something that we feel strongly is a real benefit to our industry when you all come to DC, and also to you in your relationships and what you do back home. And then lastly, as I said, we've got over 400 people registered, with more hoteliers registering every day, and so we hope that it will be a great opportunity for you all to network with hoteliers from across the country, those who are close to you and far away, and kind of learn from them and create some new relationships. And at the end of the presentation, we'll talk a little bit about the schedule, and we want to make sure that we give you those opportunities to do that networking and make some new connections. So I think now we are going to switch into the issue section of the presentation. And I'm just going to start at a high level by saying that this year we're doing things a little bit differently. We decided that we wanted to have a theme for the Legislative Action Summit that really brought all of our issues together and was something that kind of stood for the industry, stood for what we believe in. And so we came up with the theme of creating jobs, serving guests, and supporting communities. And I think first and foremost, that goes to that positive industry narrative that we want to be pushing. The fact that we create 8 million jobs across the U.S., the fact that we contribute $170 billion in tax revenue at the federal, state, and local level. Those are the types of messages that from a high level we want to make sure members of Congress are hearing. And we think by having this theme, that will be really helpful. So you know, headed into next week, we have issue briefs, issue components on each one of these themes that Chirag and I are going to talk about in a little bit more detail on the webinar, but also we will have handouts next week that provide more detail that you all can take to your meetings and serve as leave behinds and really explain these three themes and why they're important and give you the talking points you need to be effective. Like we did last year, we're also going to have state fact sheets, so you have at your fingertips the data by state of, just how many jobs, hotel jobs there are in Massachusetts, just what tax revenue is created by Texas hoteliers and all of that. Because again, we think that this kind of positive industry narrative and getting this message out about how we create jobs, serve our guests, and support our communities is really important. And the last thing I would say about these themes is within each one of these themes, and Chirag's going to take the first one, creating jobs, we have kind of subdivided some specific issues that we recommend you all talk about with your members of Congress. So for creating jobs, that's going to cover our workforce issues and our workforce concerns. And there's a specific ask on the ADA drive-by lawsuit bill that Chirag will get into in a minute. On serving guests, that's our opportunity to talk about our commitment to customer service and to our guests, our commitment to transparency in the online booking process, our work on introducing the online booking scams bill that for those of you who were here last year, we lobbied on and we're going to be lobbying on again this year. And then for supporting communities, that's our opportunity to talk about illegal hotels and kind of the rise of commercial operators in the short-term rental space and how that's impacting communities in contrast to all of the great things that you all as hoteliers do in your communities to support them. And it's also an opportunity to talk about if you have priorities in tax reform, and Chirag's going to talk a little bit about that. So that should hopefully give you a little bit of an overview of how we're approaching the issues and the meetings next week. And now I'm going to turn it over to Chirag to cover creating jobs.
Thanks, Vanessa. Our industry has one of the greatest stories to be told, and it's a story about hospitality, about community investment, and job creation. And that is not a story that the vast majority of people that come to Capitol Hill can tell. And so when members of Congress know that business interests are coming in because they are so influential in their communities, they perk up a little bit, because you're not just one person, one vote. You have the ability to influence pretty much your entire community with the number of people you employ, with the investments in charitable contributions, a variety of other ways you're involved in your communities. And so it's very important to recall that when you're having these meetings as to the interest that the member of Congress will have in the message that you send. And one of the things, as we were between HNLA and HLO, we were looking at the issues that we wanted to discuss this year, we wanted to make sure that there was a degree of continuity and consistency. For the last couple of years, we've certainly gotten together and had this meeting, but throughout the year, Vanessa and her team and our team, our coalition partners, continue to spread this message daily on Capitol Hill with members of Congress, and I know you all do in your communities as well. And so it's very important that we have some consistency in our messaging. This year, when we talk about our workforce issues, we're absolutely going to continue to hammer on the joint employer issue that we've been talking about for a couple of years. As many of you will recall, a year and a half ago, the National Labor Relations Board, which is an unelected executive agency, created a new standard which would confer liability onto a parent company for the activities of a different entity. So basically, in our case, in the world of franchising, it would create liability on a franchisor for the activities of the franchisee. And doing so would create a whole host of problematic circumstances in specifically the lodging industry. That's not the way the lodging industry was built, and as a result, it would cause a lot of difficulties with franchise agreements. It would cause a lot of difficulties between the relationships of employers and employees, and frankly, change the business model that we've all come to know and that has been so successful in creating business owners and hundreds of thousands of jobs nationally. And so this is an issue that continues on. In the previous administration, it was met with some skepticism. The Department of Labor issued a memorandum which also reinforced a new standard of joint employment. And so this year, we are pushing the opportunity to return to the old standard, which was that the definition of an employer is someone that has direct control over the conditions of employment, things like wages, hiring, firing, discipline, etc. The traditional standard that we know. The new standard created by the National Labor Relations Board and by the Department of Labor in a variety of different iterations made the standard much more unclear and very difficult to comply with, if at all. Now, there is pending litigation, which we don't necessarily need to go into, but at the end of the day, our job when we go to Capitol Hill is to talk about how important this is and what it would do to the industry if it were to continue. And there will be some notes on that as well. As we continue to talk about workforce, we must also take into account certain current events. And there has been perhaps a target on the travel industry, indicating that there may be a stronger desire to balance the needs of national security over travel and tourism. And our industry will be dramatically impacted if that were the case. We need to make sure that we reinforce the importance of travel and tourism on our economy. And so things like restricting travel or bans on travel really impact our industry, but also the jobs that are created by our industry. And third, on the workforce front, immigration is still and continues to be important to our industry because one of the greatest problems that I continue to hear as we travel around the country from our members is access to a workforce. We continue to want to find people to create and develop these good jobs, but once you have these jobs, you need to be able to staff them with employees. And a reasonable immigration policy that would allow for people to come and work in our hotels is really extremely important to the local communities and the economic impact that our businesses provide. And so supporting our industry's workforce continues to be a paramount set of issues for our conferences and our meetings with members of Congress. The next thing that we're going to discuss deals with what we're calling drive-by lawsuits. And the reason they're called drive-by lawsuits is because you have unscrupulous attorneys and serial filers that will, in many cases, literally drive by a business and look to see if there are any potential violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Having no desire to stay at the property, no desire to actually visit the property, they're filing lawsuits claiming that there are violations. And then they're following it up with a letter demanding settlement fees because they know that settling for $5,000 or $7,500 is going to be cheaper to the business than $10,000 or $15,000 that would take just to hire an attorney to defend it. We've seen this problem blow up exponentially with over 11,000 suits in the last 2 years alone. And every business is targeted. In our industry alone, it starts with a pool list. It starts with the parking lot. And then people start to go on fishing expeditions to see if there are other issues going on with the business. In some cases, they are hyper-technical violations alleging that some cosmetic issue may be an inch or two off in the wrong direction, at which point they're demanding thousands of dollars for settlement, and there's no opportunity to even understand what the problem is because oftentimes these accusations are very vague. In other cases, they are filing cookie-cutter lawsuits, hundreds of them at a time, and saying that you may be in violation of Title III of the ADA, even though no violation ever existed. So there is a bill, and our ask in this circumstance is to ask your member of Congress to co-sponsor H.R. 620, which is the ADA Reform and Education Act. And it's extremely important that we continue to drive this bill forward because we believe that there will be movement on it in the next month or so. And so fresh in the minds of members of Congress, our fly-in would be great to moving this bill further along in the process and hopefully getting it signed by the President. One quick note on the Senate side, we don't have a bill yet, but we are hopeful that one will come up. So on the House side, asking for a co-sponsorship of H.R. 620, and on the Senate side, asking them to co-sponsor it once it is introduced.
Awesome. Great, thanks, Sharad. So moving on to the next theme and set of issues, this is serving guests. And as I alluded to, this is where we want you all to talk about the kind of industry's commitment to guest service and customer service, and really focus in on some of the damaging online tactics by some rogue websites that often pose as a hotel company's website. For those of you who attended LAS last year, we had a similar ask. Last year, we had a legislation introduced called the Stop Online Booking Scams Act to address this problem. That legislation is again going to be introduced this year. We have a great group of sponsors of the legislation, and the ask is going to be that we get additional co-sponsors. And again, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is an issue where, and I'm sure you all have dealt with this in your hotels, where oftentimes customers come up to the front desk, they think that they have booked with the hotel directly, but in fact, they've booked their reservation through a third-party affiliate of the larger online travel agencies, and when they come up to kind of to the front desk and ask about their reservation, worst case scenario, there is no reservation. It was just a true scam, and that third-party affiliate, there was no reservation. Other times, customers see extra charges that they didn't realize were going to be on their credit card as a result of the room purchase because of the third-party affiliate doing the booking. Customers might not also get the room that they want or have requested. So there's a whole host of kind of consumer concern and confusion and issues that can arise that front desks in hotels across the country deal with every day. And so the legislation that we have worked with members of Congress to introduce would require that on a third-party website or on a third-party affiliate website, they clearly disclose that they aren't the hotel company's website, so that customers know who they're booking with and can ask questions if they don't feel comfortable or go to the hotel company's website if they need to. Just to give you an idea of the scale of the problem or of the concern, we did some polling in 2015 where 6% of consumers said that they had been exposed to this type of scam. We did some more recent polling last month in 2017, and 22% of consumers said that they had been exposed to this type of scam. So I think another message that we want to make sure that you all get across is that this is a problem, and it is a growing problem with consumers where they are confused and not given all the information on some of these rogue third-party websites, and the Stop Online Booking Scams Act is a way to address the problem. The legislation, there is Senate and House legislation that will be introduced right around the time of LAS next week, and so again, the ask will be for members of Congress to co-sponsor that legislation. So the third topic or third theme for LAS we have couched as supporting communities, and this has two different issues that you all can discuss in your meetings to the extent that you feel comfortable and you want to. I'm going to start with the first one, and this deals with the prevalence and rise of commercial operators on short-term rental platforms. This is, again, similar to our issue and ask for last year for those of you who were here, but we continue to see data that the vast majority and the growth for Airbnb and other short-term rental companies is coming from commercial operators, multi-unit hosts, those that rent out you know, not just one unit, but multiple units, buying up multiple condos or apartments in a building in a city, and renting them out on Airbnb without abiding by the important health and safety, security regulations, paying their fair share of taxes. And from our perspective, there needs to be a level playing field. If you're a business, you should act like a business. I think we're also very clear, and we encourage you all to be very clear in your meetings, that for our industry, this is not about the occasional home share. Home sharing has been going on for decades. We support the right of property owners to occasionally rent out a room or their home. But if you are going to be a business and do this all year round, 365 days a year, or if you're going to do this and have multiple units and operate as a business, you should have to abide by some rules of the road that every other business in this country has to abide by in the lodging industry. Obviously, as I think you all probably know and have experienced in your local communities, most of the regulation for the lodging industry is at the state and local level. So by and large, this is an issue that is playing out there. But we continue to believe there is a role for Congress, and in particular the Federal Trade Commission, to really ask for some more transparency and ask for some more data around this commercial activity on these short-term rental platforms. Airbnb and the other companies have not been transparent with the data that they release and giving the information that maybe government officials need to effectively come up with a regulatory regime and a tax regime to ensure that these businesses are operating on a level playing field. And so our ask again this year is to get Congress and the FTC to ask for that additional transparency. We think that the FTC could do a study on the rise and the prevalence of commercial operators across the country, and that information would be really helpful not only for the federal government, just as they think about this issue, but also importantly for state and local elected officials to have some more data out there as they're thinking about how to address this issue. And now I'm going to turn it over to Sharad to talk about tax reform.
Thanks, Vanessa. So tax reform has been in the news for quite a while, but the conversation has ticked up considerably over the last couple of months. And the need for tax reform is quite tremendous. The last time there was any sort of overhaul of the tax code was in 1986. And if you look at the tax code today, it is comprised of over 74,000 pages, 7 different tax brackets, and the average, in the last year, it took 8.9 billion hours for Americans to fill out their taxes, and that's businesses, individuals, you name it, across the board. So it is tremendously important that if there is an opportunity to reform the tax code, to bring down rates, and to simplify the code, it's going to benefit businesses, in particular in the lodging industry, considerably. And so because there is a unique opportunity, what is being described as a once-in-a-generation opportunity, we want to make sure that the voice of the lodging industry is heard by lawmakers who will be instrumental in shaping this ultimate legislation. Now, the two things to keep in mind in the discussions on tax reform, there have been 2 different schools of thought, the first of which was a document created last June by the House Republicans. Frankly, it was a campaign document known as A Better Way. It was what's commonly referred to as the blueprint for tax reform. And what this did, it was 30-some pages, so it was certainly not a comprehensive bill, but frankly, it was just that. It was a blueprint, it was an outline that discussed a variety of ways to drive down rates. At its core, in the lodging industry, we support the idea of driving down tax rates, whether they are for corporations, which hover somewhere near 39%, or pass-through entities, which are around 40% across the country. And so the idea is that anything that we can do that will benefit the industry will take shape by driving down tax rates. And so lowering rates is by far the most important thing. Now, the secret to the sauce here is how do you get to lowering rates without compromising the current benefits that are enjoyed by folks in the industry. Whether it's individuals, whether it's businesses, whether it's our industry in particular, there are certain advantages that folks have gotten to understand, and there's going to be some give and take. And so there are a variety of factors that are being considered in terms of how do you drive down the rates for businesses and individuals, and at the same time balancing the ledger and creating a circumstance where you're not blowing a hole into the deficit. And so there are a few different pieces here. Now, the first of which is interest deductibility. And with interest deductibility, it's the House blueprint that discusses the elimination of deductibility of business interests. And doing so, because a lot of businesses employ debt financing to grow their business, a lot of businesses will therefore view the elimination of interest deductibility as a new tax on business growth or expansion. As a trade-off, however, the blueprint offers immediate expensing of business assets, which might be an effective substitute, but this is an area where we're encouraging folks coming to the conference to have this conversation with their members of Congress. We're not even necessarily saying, hey, this is the only area where we should think, or we're not even necessarily taking a side, but we want you to have this conversation to explain how the elimination of interest deductibility would affect your business. There's also a discussion in terms of how to fund tax reform about creating a border-adjusted tax. And what this would do is create a tax on goods coming in from overseas, which would foster the development of an American manufacturing industry that has been dormant for many years. And so there are concerns in our industry because a variety of things. Some businesses are based overseas. In other cases, goods that we need in our hotels come from overseas. And so this might be an impact. IRC Section 1031, which pertains to like-kind exchanges. So Section 1031 of the Internal Revenue Code has existed since the inception of the code itself and is an efficient means by which businesses can transfer land. And so what it allows is the deferral of capital gains taxes when you when you sell land and then when you purchase a new parcel at the same time. And so in our business, for a fairly simple example, it allows a hotelier to go from an 80-room property to a 150-room property and deferring the capital gains taxes on the sale of the 80-room property if he or she rolls those proceeds into the purchase of the new property. And in doing so, it's a job creator, both in the direct jobs for the new building, as well as the construction jobs and the ancillary jobs that are created in that process as well. And so there is discussion about eliminating Section 1031 as a means to pay for tax reform. And we want to make sure that we're reinforcing to members of Congress, hey, if you do this, it's going to prevent us from having this important access to capital that we need in order to create jobs and expand our businesses. And then lastly on here is the estate tax. Both the President's plan that he's outlined last week or week and a half or so ago was very limited. It was less than a page that was even released. And it was just a broad discussion. But both the President and the House Republicans have discussed eliminating the estate tax, or the death tax as it's known. And that is a benefit to our industry, of course, in terms of being able to efficiently and effectively transfer businesses to your next generation. And so these are some of the ideas on tax reform. Ultimately, what we're trying to get at is to open a conversation with your member of Congress to say, hey, we know there are big discussions that are going on regarding tax reform. Here's how it's going to affect me. Here's how it's going to affect our business. And that may actually differ from the people in your group or the people who are coming at the LAS, or to the LAS rather, because your businesses may differ or what's important to you may be different. But it's important that we open this dialogue and make sure that the voice of the lodging industry is heard by our leaders.
Great. Thanks, Rob. Well, I think I might pause here for just a second before we get on to the logistics to just see if anybody has any questions on the issues and themes that Chirag and I talked about. As I mentioned, we will be going over all of this in more detail next Wednesday, and we'll have simple and concise one-pagers on each of these themes and issues for you when you arrive on Wednesday and for you to share with your members of Congress. We are again going to have the app as well so that you will have this information on the app. And for those of you who were here last year, we are also, again, having our kind of communications expert, Steve Allen, come present both on the most kind of just broader communication techniques, but also some specific thoughts on how to make these messages for these issues really tight and concise. And he'll share some kind of message boxes with all of you again so that you have that as well. So I might just pause for a second and see if there's any questions on issues before we move on. It looks like we've got a question from someone on the service animals and their impact on hotels that don't allow pets. Any progress on that issue? From my perspective, and Sharad, I'll let you chime in, I think that we have been in an education mode with our members, trying to provide as much information about what the law requires you to do or not do as it relates to that issue and to service animals. But we can also follow up with some more specific information next week too. Sharad, anything you want?
Yeah, I would just add, I agree, echo the sentiments about education. I think that the biggest thing is that what a lot of folks, both our folks in the industry, when you come to a desk at a hotel, or even folks trying to come into any property, is that the definition under the law of a service animal is very, very specific. Previously, there was some vague language as to whether or not a service animal could be used for emotional support, and you had all kinds of things, people bringing in ferrets and cats, et cetera. But in this case, a service animal is very specific, and the language under the law is that it must be a dog. And there's some very specific parameters. And so education is the most important thing here, because that way hoteliers know what can be allowed. There's some exceptions. I think miniature horses also there as well, but there are only some very specific functionalities that an animal can have and what benefit they provide its owner. And so if there are specific questions about that, we're happy to go over them offline. But in terms of changing that, we're not pushing it now because it seems like the law has been reasonably better defined to help our industry and prevent some of this taking advantage of our businesses otherwise.
Okay, well, I think we'll move on to logistics, and then, of course, Sharad and I are available. If you have any other questions as we move through logistics, please feel free to type them into the webinar, and we'll also be available offline to make sure that you all feel comfortable and get the answers to all of your questions about the issues. So for logistics, first off, and thanks for those of you on the webinar who have eagle eyes and realize the dates are wrong, so don't get concerned. It is Wednesday, May 17th and Thursday, May 18th. So the days of the weeks are just mixed up. We apologize for that, but the actual date is correct. So again, those of you should be here starting around midday on Wednesday, May 17th, and we will finish up by Thursday, May 18th by 4 or 5 p.m. When the congressional meetings conclude. On Wednesday, a little bit different than last year. For those of you who are Hotel Pass contributors for HOA, there will be a lunch with a congressional speaker from 11:30 to 12:45. We will then move into the LAS general session from 1 to 5, similar to last year, and we'll get into it in a minute, but we have a political pundit, Amy Walter, who is coming to kind of kick things off and talk about the political landscape, give you all an opportunity to ask her questions about everything going on in D.C. and kind of a preview of what's to come in the 2018 election cycle. Following her, Sharad and I are going to talk in more specific detail about the issues, and then also, as I mentioned, we have our communications expert, Steve Allen, coming back to do some presentation and kind of interactive sessions with all of you, both specifically related to the issues, but then also more general, just communications techniques. And then we have 2 congressional speakers lined up. Representative Crowley, who is the House Democratic Caucus Chair, and then Representative Steve Scalise, who is the House Majority Whip. So I think they will give you a good perspective from both sides of the aisle during the afternoon session. And then that evening, AHOA is having its PAC reception right after at 5 o'clock. And then there's the broader networking reception from 6 to 7:30. HLA also will be having its Stars of the Industry award ceremony from 5:30 to 6. And we have Jenna Bush-Hager, who is going to be the kind of moderator and headliner for that Stars of the Industry event. That is open to everyone. We encourage folks to kind of go between and attend as many of these events as possible. And then on Thursday morning from 7 to 9 is when we have our breakfast session. We've actually just confirmed Senator Dean Heller from Nevada, who will speak at that session. And we'll also do some last-minute kind of state prep and make sure all the delegations have all the information they need before they head to the Hill. And then obviously you have your meetings on the Hill all day long. We will again have a hospitality suite on the House side. For those of you who have come in the past or came last year, we have a room reserved in the House office building so that in between meetings you have a place to kind of convene and organize and gather and sit down and get a snack. We'll have all of that specific room information in your materials when you arrive on Wednesday. And then lastly, I think we talked about it, but I would say these are our featured speakers with the slight addition of Senator Dean Heller for Thursday morning. So I think you're going to get a really good look at both the House and the Senate and what's going on politically. For those of you who have not yet registered, we encourage you to do so. And for those of you who have registered, thank you. And this webinar is recorded, so we will put it on our website so that if you want to share it with anyone else or re-listen to parts of it, please feel free to do that. And with that, I might just pause to make sure there aren't any other questions before we close the webinar. And Sharad, anything else from your end I should ask?
No, it was great. We've covered it. Looking forward to seeing everybody together.
It looks like we had one more question come in about the meetings, the congressional meetings. And the way we do the congressional meetings, we do them based on your the state that you reside in. You will be in that, or the state where you do business and reside in, you will be in that state group. And then we try to make sure that for every hotelier who comes to DC, you have a meeting with your member of Congress as well as other members of Congress in your state and then your senators. As I think Sharad mentioned, sometimes those meetings are not actually with the senators and the congressmen, they're with staff, but staff are how things get done around here in DC, so they are equally important. But we want to make sure that each of you who come here get some good meetings with your member of Congress from your home district, as well as a broader cross-section throughout your state. All of that information you will get once you arrive, and like last year, it will be populated in the app that you can download on your phone. Those meetings are in the process of being scheduled, and as I'm sure some of you can appreciate, members of Congress' schedule are always changing. So we typically don't actually hand out that information until the end of the day on Wednesday, and sometimes there's even changes Thursday morning as their schedules change. So you will get all of that once you get here on Wednesday. And one last thing I should just mention, I mentioned the HLA Stars of the Industry Award ceremony, where we will have 2 additional senators there, Senator Daines and Senator Klobuchar. So there will be many opportunities for all of you to see many different elected officials throughout the 2 days of events. So thanks everyone for joining, and please be in touch if you have questions. We look forward to seeing you next week.